Mom, everything is good. I'm not in a camp. This seems like a typical assurance at first. A youngster soothing a parent, a terrified message that remains within the bounds of our comprehension of reality. However, what if the communication is a component of a far more extensive control system? Because behind those words is a world in which millions of individuals are said to have disappeared into a system so sophisticated and silent that it no longer uses force in the conventional sense. There aren't any evident conflicts, no front lines, there were no explosions in the streets. Rather, there is something much more subtle and disturbing: information. And the most disturbing question is not what is happening there. It is how much of this system already exists around us in smaller forms, unnoticed, unchallenged, and quietly expanding. Stay with this story carefully, because once you understand how it works, you will never look at surveillance, technology, or even your phone the same way again. Chapter 1. Zara, an ordinary life before the system. Her name was Zara. She was 24 years old. She did not consider herself important, powerful, or political. She lived a life that, on the surface, would not attract attention anywhere in the world. She taught children at a local school. She lived in a small apartment. On weekends, she visited her grandmother, helped cook traditional meals, and spent quiet evenings drawing in a notebook filled with sketches of people, faces, and places she dreamed of one day visiting. Her life was built on simplicity, routine, family, and small hopes for the future. At first, nothing felt unusual. There were checkpoints in the city, but checkpoints had existed before. There were cameras, but cameras existed in every modern city. There were phone checks, but those were explained as security measures. People around her began to disappear. A shopkeeper who used to greet her in the morning was suddenly gone. A neighbor who lived across the street no longer opened his door. When asked, authorities simply said they were taken for education or training. No one explained what that meant, and in systems like this, uncertainty becomes more powerful than truth. Zara began deleting messages, avoiding conversations, changing her behavior without being told to because fear no longer needed instructions. It had already become automatic. Chapter 2. The system that sees everything. What Zara did not know was that she was already inside a system designed to observe life at a level humans have never been able to achieve before. This system combined facial recognition, phone tracking, financial records, location history, and behavioral patterns into a single network. It did not simply record actions, it interpreted them. It analyzed where a person went, how often they deviated from routine, who they met, what they bought, and even how they behaved in public spaces. A single small change, walking a different route, visiting a different district, or buying slightly more food than usual, could be flagged as suspicious deviation. In isolation, these actions meant nothing. But in a system built on prediction, nothing is ever isolated. One afternoon, Zara met a friend for tea in a district slightly outside her normal routine. It was a simple human moment: conversation, laughter, ordinary life. But the system did not see humanity. It saw deviation. A few days later, she purchased extra rice for a family gathering. Again, normal behavior. Again, harmless. But the system did not interpret intention. It interpreted pattern disruption, and every disruption added invisible points to a score she did not know existed, a score that was slowly deciding her fate. Chapter 3. The night everything disappeared. It happened at 3:47 a.m., not during chaos, not during war, not during anything that would normally signal danger. It happened in silence. The knock on the door was controlled, measured, certain. There was no urgency in it, because urgency implies uncertainty, and this system was not uncertain. When the door opened, 6 officers entered. There were no explanations, no accusations, no dialogue, only procedure. Zara was given no chance to understand what was happening. A black hood was placed over her head, her hands were tied, her identity was removed before her voice could even form a question. The last image she saw was her grandmother standing frozen in the doorway, not screaming, not resisting, and just witnessing something she could not stop. Then everything disappeared. She was transported for hours in complete silence. Other people were in the same vehicle, other lives being processed the same way. No one spoke, not because they agreed, but because speech no longer had value. When the hood was finally removed, she was no longer in her city. She was in a facility surrounded by walls, cameras, and silence so heavy it felt physical. And she was no longer Zara. She was a number. Chapter 4. Inside the system of control. Inside the facility, identity no longer existed in the way she understood it. Names were replaced with numbers. Clothing was identical. Rooms were overcrowded. Lights were never turned off. Cameras were placed in every corner, ensuring that even stillness was recorded. The daily routine was not designed for productivity. It was designed for transformation. Every day followed the same structure. Wake up at a fixed time, stand in formation, listen to instructions, repeat phrases, sit motionless for hours, follow instructions without deviation. Language became restricted. Behavior became measured. Even basic actions like eating or speaking were monitored and interpreted. This was not simply detention, it was reconditioning. Every system in the environment reinforced one idea: individuality was a risk, compliance was safety, silence was survival. Over time, the repetition began to reshape perception itself. Days blurred together, memory became unreliable, time lost meaning, and in environments like this, the mind does something dangerous: it adapts. Chapter 5. The Breaking of Identity. As time passed, the system began to work deeper than behavior. It targeted identity itself. Prisoners were required to confess to crimes they did not understand. Refusal was considered evidence of guilt. Confession was considered proof of wrongdoing. Either choice resulted in punishment. This created a psychological loop with no exit. Language was restricted further. Cultural expression was removed. Religious practice was punished. Personal memory became a liability. Even thoughts began to feel unsafe. Some prisoners adapted completely. Others broke, not physically, but mentally. After months of repetition, surveillance, and psychological pressure, some began to internalize the system's narrative. They began to believe they were guilty, that they needed correction, that the system was justified. This is where control becomes most effective, when it no longer needs force, because belief has replaced resistance. But not everyone remained. Some disappeared permanently. Some were transferred. Some never returned. And for those who were released, the system did not end. It followed them home. Chapter 6. The system does not end at the walls. Release did not mean freedom. Outside the facility, surveillance continued. Movement remained restricted. Communication was monitored. Weekly reporting was required. Even private homes were subject to inspection. The system had expanded beyond physical walls. It had become environmental. A population-wide monitoring structure ensured that behavior continued to be observed long after detention ended. And this raises a larger question, one that extends beyond any single region. If technology can observe, interpret, and respond to human behavior at this scale, what happens when it is refined? And what happens when it spreads? Because the systems built here are not isolated anymore. They are being exported, adapted, and studied globally. Chapter 7. The Final Warning. Zara's story is not just about one person. It is about what happens when surveillance becomes predictive, when data becomes judgment, and when human behavior is reduced to patterns. This is not just a story about one place. It is a warning about a direction technology can take when combined with absolute control. Because once a system learns how to track everything, it can learn how to decide everything. And once that happens, the question is no longer whether it is real. The question is where it appears next. So before you close this video, ask yourself one final question. If a system can learn who you are, predict what you do, and decide what happens next, who is really in control? You or the system watching you? Because once a system like this is built, it does not forget. It only improves, and it never stops watching.